When natural disasters strike, we are suddenly reminded of the power of the natural world around us. You know, as human beings, because we've got giant earth-moving equipment and explosives and things, we think, you know, human beings are so powerful. And we are suddenly shocked when cities shake in earthquakes and there are these enormous tsunamis, great black waves of debris-filled water sweeping everything before them. And suddenly we're reminded of the fragility of life and how easily things can be swept away. And it leaves us with things that we need to talk about, which is what we're going to do today on the chat room with the Dean of Sydney, Phillip Jensen.
Hello,
Phillip.
Phil.
Now, when these things happen, they're horrible things, aren't they?
Oh, they're appalling things. They're really hard. I mean, there's a dreadful loss of life, but that's just the beginning in one sense, because there's all the families that are bereaved. To say nothing of the equipment of life that you have to rebuild, the businesses that are out, but the grief that happens. I mean, we now have children raised without parents. We have husbands who've lost wives, parents who've lost children. Just awful. And it doesn't go away in a moment. I mean, our television news cycle is, 1 week, 2 weeks. And so we're conscious of it for 1 week, 2 weeks. But it takes years to recover. And of course, some people never recover. I mean, apart from the fact that some people have died, large numbers of this last Japanese tsunami, for example, have died.
Christians do well in this. I mean, I've kept seeing on the internet the number of Christian missions and charities and churches really involved in places like Christchurch and Japan and so on. Christians throw themselves into helping,
Yes.
don't they?
And we are there before the problems.
Yep.
That is, the non-Christian relief agencies are sitting here in Sydney.
Yep.
There is a problem, they go fly in and do something. But the Christian agencies are already at work all over the world, and so they're part of the community. They've got a better sense of who the locals are, what it was like, etc. And they're there from day one. And so the Christian agencies always do a lot of work and do really well in that regard, yes.
And the other thing that Christians around the world do is they pray, and that's powerful. The rest of the world won't give credit to how much is done when we pray for people going through these things, but it makes a difference.
It's a funny thing, isn't it? People do talk of prayer unless they're very self-conscious atheists like our Prime Minister. But other people actually, we're praying for you, which is a kind of religious way of saying we're thinking of you, because people need that sense of connection, that sense that people care out there. But of course Christians actually do pray for people and pray with people at the time, which has both a psychological and spiritual benefit. The psychological benefit is there is hardly anything that conveys more my care for you than actually put my arm around you and pray for you in the crisis at the time. And people who have got stiff upper lips, I've noticed when I've prayed with them, they just crack into crumble and tears, because there's a release level that comes with someone actually caring that much and praying that much. And no one plays with prayer. You actually are expressing what's on your deepest heart's concern. But then God actually listens to our prayers. God is at work helping us in our times of great crisis. And so there's great spiritual benefit in praying.
There's another thing that happens, because in something like Christchurch or Japan or any of these, a lot of us aware of them we're removed from them.
Yes.
We're not there personally.
Yeah.
So for us, another problem arises. It is, how do I make sense of this?
Yes.
Suddenly, the world is a more dangerous place than I thought it was. It's not a benign place. Life can end more suddenly than I thought it could end. And so the puzzle that some people will go through, maybe without saying anything out loud, is this is frightening.
Yes.
How do I make sense of this, don't they?
Yeah. I don't know how to make sense of the electronic world as opposed to the real world.
Right.
I find there's a strange disjunction. I am right there in the streets where the earthquake is happening, but I'm not. I'm sitting here in my armchair watching it happening. Some years ago, where we were living was destroyed by a hailstorm, and all the roofs of the houses in our street and just the streets around about us were just completely demolished. It really did affect people quite significantly differently, because it wasn't electronic.
They were there.
They were there.
Yep.
They were terrified.
Yep.
And they were not terrified at the time alone. They were terrified for a week or 2 weeks later, that every time it started to rain, people started getting uptight again. It was very interesting. the fear factor that was there.
It's like when your house is broken into, suddenly a level of security goes.
Yes,
Yep.
yeah. Whereas watching electronic things, yes, it does bring it into my lounge room. It's not something I'm reading in a history book like Mount Vesuvius. It's there. I see people struggling, but it's somehow different. I'm moved by it, but I'm not.
It's not just electronic. People have always surely had to make sense of bad things they've heard reported to them. So they come to Jesus and say, what about those Galileans whose blood Pilate mingled with their sacrifices? We heard about this bad thing. We weren't killed, but something bad has happened. Make sense of it for us.
Yes, but there's a difference between make sense of it as an intellectual issue and make sense of it because my world is no longer safe.
Yep.
Security is a very strange thing. You know it when you don't have it. It's like housework. Housework is noticed when it's not done, not when it is done. And so you think the floor underneath you is safe and secure because floors are safe and secure. So actually you don't think about it at all. We're just sitting in our comfortable chairs here. It doesn't cross my mind that in the next 5 minutes, next 5 hours, next 5 days, next 5 years, that suddenly this floor is going to buckle or wave, and it's just not part of my thinking. But once you're in an earthquake, then not only does it all buckle and shake from underneath you, but every slight aftershock, you think it's all going to go again. And I can't trust, I don't have that sense of life goes on securely from day in, day out, all around about me. I live in insecurity. Now, our security, what an earthquake shows is, our security is phony, is false. We think we are safe and secure.
And even the people who are sitting here looking at it are saying things to themselves that don't actually shake their own security. So I have ordinary Aussies saying to me, oh mate, because they're deists, so they think God's not involved in the world. And they say, oh mate, stuff happens. Look, I'm really sorry for them, and I'm going to give some money to the appeal and all that sort of thing. But you live in the world, stuff happens. They're sort of shrugging their shoulders because their security hasn't been shaken.
That's right, and because, they don't get earthquakes in Sydney, do we?
Yes. Well, it got as far as Newcastle.
Yeah, it got as far as Newcastle. That was a small thing. And it's not likely to happen again. It's not like we're living in New Zealand, the Shaky Islands, or the Isles, or up in Japan. No, in one sense, you don't want to say that because that sounds like smugness, and it sounds like you don't care about people who do live in such places. But another level, I think a lot of Australians feel that way. But then there are floods overnight here in Sydney and someone's been drowned just on the outskirts of Sydney. I mean, it can happen. Our life is never that secure. I mean, some pedestrians were walking along the street the other day. Car went up in the curb and killed them.
I have had, and I've heard it said, people who are sufficiently green want to say, the world is doing this to us in reaction to what we've done. We've heated the climate.
Yes.
We're at fault. We are to blame. We brought this on ourselves. They want to make sense of it in those terms.
Well, there's a little element of truth, but there's a strange new religion around. Mother Nature is coming back at us, and we've hurt Mother Nature, and Mother Nature doesn't exist. She's not a person, she's not personal, and that belief in God is that, or Gaia, or however you're going to say it, that's a nonsense. There is truth that there are natural processes at work in this world, like fault lines, earthquakes, etc. And there are truths that sometimes the way we act is less than wise. So building atomic reactors on a fault line does not seem the most intelligent place in the world to put them.
Right.
Now, it's easy to say that in retrospect,
Yep.
and it's not altogether easy to find what the alternative power sources that should be there are not. But when you have the problems we've had in Japan in the last few weeks, you've got to scratch your head and say, why on earth did they put off?
And then you go one step on, there is always in the crowd one smart aleck and says, see mate, see, you reckon you're a Christian, this proves your God doesn't exist, look at all those dead people, see? Now,
that's a different one, isn't it?
Yes, well, I said the smart aleck.
Yeah.
And I think it is. But there's an answer to that, isn't there?
Well, there are several answers to it. But, I mean, one part of the answer is to say, well, we haven't built in a way that acknowledges what we know of the environment, what we know of the context in which. I mean, we've built San Francisco on a fault line.
And Christchurch and Tokyo and...
You can live your life in San Francisco and never have the earthquake.
Yep.
But someone's life sometime, somewhere down the line,
yes,
is going to have the earthquake. And so you've got to say it's a silly place to build a city. What do you do about it now? How do you build? How do you rebuild so as to withstand earthquakes, and what size earthquakes? Well, they're life's issues. But if you asked me to live in San Francisco, I wouldn't.
Yep.
You'd have to have a very good reason for me to live in San Francisco.
See, but my mate, the smart Aleck, is not going to be satisfied.
No, he's saying a different thing. He's saying
yep.
that the God who runs this world kills thousands of people irrationally, amorally, just
yep.
at a whim, and or he's lost control of the world. He can't run a world. Or, frankly, he's saying there is no God, isn't he?
Yes, he's saying it proves your God doesn't exist because you claim your God has all the power in the world and has all this compassion and love.
Yes.
Well, either he doesn't love those people or he's not powerful enough to fix it.
That's right.
Yep.
It's the old philosophical play thing, which is, it's all right provided you remember it's a philosophy class and not reality.
Yes. Yep.
In reality, people are really hurt. People are really struggling. In a philosophy class, we're having mental games, you know. God is all good, God is all powerful, evil exists, therefore either God is not all good or he's not all powerful, and therefore God is not. Now, that kind of little logic exercise is a good logic exercise to get undergraduates to think. But it's a silly argument, really, in the end, because if God is not there, there is no evil, because the concept of evil is a concept that is the opposite of God.
So without God, you can't say that's evil and that's good.
No.
Yep.
There is no good, there is no evil. I mean, there's a philosophy magazine called Philosophy Now, which their morals editor has finally acknowledged that atheism implies amorality. There is no morality.
So he didn't give up on his atheism, he gave up on his morality.
He gave up on his morality,
yes.
which is, seeing he's the editor of the morality column, is a small problem.
It's an interesting move, yes.
It is an interesting move, but he's just coming to the logic of atheism,
yep.
that it implies there is neither good nor evil. So the problem for the atheist is not the problem of evil, it's the problem of goodness.
Where does it come from?
Where does goodness come from? Where does this concept of goodness come from? Because all there is.
Yep.
And whether you see thousands of people killed in an earthquake, or whether you see thousands getting too fat by eating fast food, it's just is. What
yep.
is. So it's neither here nor there. What they're calling upon the Christians to do is to explain, well, what is God doing about evil in this world? And there's lots that can be answered to that.
Well, in fact, I mean, one of the things I've said to my mate is, what do you want God to do? And I actually had a bloke say to me once, he said, mate, anytime someone does something to hurt someone else, bang, snuff them out.
Yeah.
The answer is, of course, neither you nor I would be here. None of us would be here.
That's a terrible answer.
Yes.
Because what the Bible teaches is God's patience. He has patiently endured our evil for centuries. For centuries upon millennia, he has patiently endured our evil and has not snuffed us out from the beginning of our wickedness and sinfulness, but has continued to bring some form of judgment upon us, but not the final form of judgment upon us.
Okay. I'll come back to that idea of judgment in a moment. One of the things I've tried to do is to, because this guy's playing a game,
yep.
is to try to get him back to reality and say things like, have you noticed that Christians hurt too? How can
Yes.
you explain the fact that this Christian couple goes on loving God and following Christ even though their baby died? You need to include that in your worldview.
Yeah.
How does that make sense to you? Because it gets it away from being a little game.
Yes, it does. It does. I was in a discussion group many years ago where they were playing this game, and nearly everyone in the room was non-Christian. And this woman said to me, she piped up and said, "Well, I was in prisoner of war camp as a child with the Japanese in Indonesia, and I saw terrible things being done. And my heart sank because I thought this is a very difficult question now to answer.
Yes.
Because we're no longer in the philosophy game. We actually got a real person who's talking about awful things she saw. And when she finished describing something of it, she said, "And that's why I believe in God." Which is the exact opposite answer that everybody in the room was expecting because of the way she was speaking.
But it's interesting these tragedies produce believers probably more than they produce atheists.
That's right. Because if you're in a world which is absolutely random and is outside your control and there is no God, well, where do you turn to then?
Yep.
It's awful. You can make no sense of it because there is no sense to be made of it. Now, that's not a reason to believe in God, because then you'll just have a kind of Freudian projection of a father who's going to look after me in the midst of everything. But belief in God is not ultimately challenged by the sufferings of the world if you understand what the Bible tells you about God and the sufferings of this world.
I'll tell you my next move with this bloke. I said, all right, if you want to say that the bad things come from God or are allowed by God, are you prepared to give God the credit for the good things? Jesus said God makes the sunshine and the rainfall on wicked people like you and me, as well as on good people. So are you prepared to say thank you to God for every good meal, every good friend? He just blustered a bit. He didn't say a lot after that.
No, because he really just wants an excuse not to believe in God.
Yeah.
Now, what we've got to do is help people understand the truth about God properly. So a lot of liberal theology preaches a God who is all love, all compassion, all kindness, all goodness, but there is no sense of wrath, judgment, sovereignty, power.
Yep.
There's just indulgence. Well, then, of course, when you have problems, well, where's God? I mean, where is this loving, indulgent, caring, all compassionate, never judge, never punish anybody kind of, where is he? And that's a problem. The problem is laying in the fact of their theological misunderstandings of God. For the God of the Bible is both compassionate and just.
Which brings us back to judgment, because a God who loves judges.
Yes, absolutely. He must. See, love and hate are obvious opposites, but they're not the only opposites. Love and indifference are also opposites, because if you love somebody, you care. If you're indifferent, you don't care. And those who therefore don't care about the injustices of the world are unloving. So when you read of what, the classic Adolf Hitler did to the Jews, you should care. You should say, no, we do want justice. No, we do want punishment. And consequently, the Jewish community have rightly pursued Nazi war criminals for years and years and years. And you say, here's an old man who 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, as a young man, was doing terribly inhumane things. But surely 60 years later we can forget about it. And they say, no.
We want to live in a world that is just.
We need justice.
Yep.
And it's not right that a person... Now that's because they love the people who were hurt, the people who were murdered and massacred, and they love humanity. And they're right to love. But love means justice, means punishment.
So in the light of that, can it be the case that some of these things that happen fit into that part of what God is doing? It's part of God alerting us to the danger we're in, warning us. And the fact of what could be going on?
Yes. I mean, ultimately God is going to bring everything to justice.
Yeah.
But he is patiently enduring, giving us opportunities to repent, giving us opportunity to fix up our lives. Therefore, while he has brought judgment upon us in this world, so far it is only partial judgment. He's withdrawn some of his favour towards us. See, initially humans have said, we want to run the world without God. And God, therefore, has given us what we've asked for. He's withdrawn from the world to let us run the world without him. Now, if he withdrew completely, we would be cactus.
It would fall apart.
It would all fall apart. So he hasn't withdrawn completely, but he has given us He's given us the responsibility that we're wanting and given us our head. And consequently, we've made a terrible mess of all kinds of things.
Yep.
Now, if your mate says, well, I want him to fix up every time something goes, well, that's a different form of judgment. That's not what the Bible says about God. But that does mean that the justice of God at the moment is, in a sense, unfairly distributed. So some people suffer greatly, other people suffer mildly, having done the same things. And that's unfair. And we live in an unfair, unjust world.
And to some extent, we just have to understand this is a world that is in rebellion against God,
Yes.
from which God has partly withdrawn.
Yes.
Hence, life will hurt.
Yes.
So the person who says, why does life hurt is like the bloke who lives on the equator saying, why is it hot? The answer is, where you live.
That's right. And it's an understanding of that which says, if you want God's world, it will be perfectly just, but it's not this world.
Yep.
And you said you wanted a world without God. This is what it's like. This is just a taste of what it's like. It will be worse in hell than what it is here. And if you don't like here, then turn back to God.
In the light of that, I can then make the move of saying to my friend, God looks at the suffering in this world, and what he does about it is he comes and he suffers with us and he suffers for us.
Yes.
And understanding that God knows about suffering, not because he's God and knows everything, but because he has suffered, I
Yes.
think is helpful sometimes.
Yes, I think we need to move there. That is, if a person is genuine in their concern for the suffering and injustice of the world, the gospel of Jesus Christ has a wonderful answer for you. If a person is unconcerned about the injustice of the world, but uses the arguments of suffering and evil to disprove God, then the judgment of God needs to be told to them. That is, God is sending warning after warning. As the book of Revelation has it, he's trumpeting, there's something wrong with this world, there's something wrong with this world. And you're not listening to the trumpet. You're saying, oh yeah, look, God's not around, what a mess he's made, and so on. But actually God, well, in the book of Amos, you find that God repeatedly sent troubles to the people of Israel to warn them to come back to him.
God's megaphone to get our attention.
Yes, I mean,
Yep.
as long as I'm living in safety and security and wealth and prosperity, I think I don't need God. But the heart attack can be tomorrow. The stroke can be this afternoon.
So in fact, there's a
The
kindness, there's a love in this.
Oh, terrific
There is a
love.
wake up and look where you are.
Exactly, and not live in safety and security. And
Yep.
it's interesting that one of the big enemies of people coming to faith in God and Christ is affluence. The success of science lies not in the intellectual concept of science, but in the technology that it's given us. And so people have given up their trust and faith in God and turning to God because they think they do not need God personally. It's not the God of the gaps, it's the God of wealth and security. They feel safe without him.
I put my trust elsewhere. I put it in technology, in
Yeah.
my bank account, whatever.
Yes.
Yep.
One man I know, their child was diagnosed in utero through the screening as not going to be able to live when it was born, because it would be born without lungs. And he was a science teacher, and he went back to his science lab and told, he was breaking down in tears, so alarmed was he about this. And the other science teacher said, oh, don't worry, modern medicine, they'll sort it out. Well, they didn't.
No.
And they couldn't.
No.
But
And
there's
you're
this-
putting your faith in the wrong place.
in the wrong
Yep,
place.
yep.
We live in a world which has got little children that die at birth.
Yep.
And this is awful. This is dreadful. This is appalling. But this is God's warning to us that this world is not right. There's something wrong. We need to address what's wrong with this world. And it's unjust and it's unfair. And we want a world of fairness and justice.
Which is
Going to happen.
Yep. It's God's rescue mission in Jesus Christ that gets us
But
there.
it gets us there. But you're right, the other side of it is for people who are really worried, this is the message, isn't it? That
Yeah.
God is not so remote from it. God came in the person of his Son and suffered, just like we do, through the circumstances of life, but suffered even more. He suffered, as most of us don't do, he was bashed and beaten and killed, and suffered even more, as none of us can do, that is, he bore the sins of other people in his death. And so God is not removed or remote from suffering. He enters into human suffering and actually rescues us out of our eternal suffering by his Son's death.
So he suffered our punishment, purchased our forgiveness. He's done all of those things for us on our behalf.
Yes,
Yep.
which is massive.
Yep.
And voluntarily did it. Both God gave his Son and Jesus gave himself
Yep.
for this. It was a voluntary thing that the Son did as the Father asked him to do, to give himself to rescue other people by entering into this suffering on our behalf.
I remember someone saying to me once, what could God know about suffering? And I said, I don't think there's anything you could suffer that Jesus hasn't been through.
No, he's suffered all
Been betrayed
and
by
more.
your friends? Happened to him.
Yep.
Your friends let you down? Happened to him. Physical pain? Happened to him.
Yes.
Spiritual agony? Happened to him.
Yes, he suffered the extreme. I'm sure you can find something that he didn't happen to, and I didn't get cancer.
Yeah.
Right? But in principle, yes, the sufferings of this world fell upon him so that he can rescue us out of the sufferings of this world and bring a kingdom where justice and righteousness rule and where every tear is done away with. There is no more mourning, there is no more crying, there is no more death because it's been done away with.
Quick final question. When these sorts of things fill our headlines, is it an opportunity for Christians to have good conversations?
I think it's an opportunity for Christians to pray and to pray with people. So when people say to me, isn't it awful? I say, yes, why don't we pray about it? Because in the end, it's not an intellectual question.
Yep.
And if I enter into it as an intellectual question, I'm always misquoted and misunderstood. I really need to say, now if a person's not willing to pray with me about it, then they're most likely not willing to talk with me about it in reality terms. They're just playing games like your mate.
So, that's a really useful thing to think about. Very often, one of the things you can do, quite often, is you can pray with someone. When you can't have a conversation with them, you can still pray with them. Can't you?
Absolutely. It's a really good time to be praying with people.
And a good thing to think about. And we hope that we've managed to work through some of the issues involved in these awful tragedies that have filled our headlines recently in this edition of the Chat Room. Phillip, Jensen, thank you for your
It's a pleasure.
contributions. And if you'd like to hear him teach the Bible, that's even better. Come along to St Andrew's Cathedral if you're in Sydney anytime.
No,
We'd love
come to Sydney too here.
Come to Sydney, to St Andrew's Cathedral to hear Phillip teach the Bible. And we'll see you again next time on the Chat Room.